Welcome very much to this afternoon's session, which we're delighted for you to be joining us for. My name's Nicola Stoyer. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Deputy Chief Executive at Power to Change. I'm delighted to be chairing this afternoon's session and guiding us through the conversations, which I think are going to be super interesting. I'm going to shortly introduce you to our brilliant panel that we've got joining us today. But before I get on to that, we'd love to know a little bit about who is joining us. So just so you know, the platform that we're on means that we can't see you, and I'm not sure that you can see each other, but we'd love to know a little bit more about who you are. So do feel free to use the chat function to introduce yourselves, tell us who you are, where you're joining from today, if you're linked to an organisation, and just help us all feel a little bit more connected to each other before we get cracking. So for those of you who don't know Power to Change, just a brief bit of context. So we are the think, do, tank that backs community business. And we know that community business works to create stronger, more inclusive local economies that benefit local people and local places. So we see community business as part of a vibrant social economy that creates inclusive growth. So this is a social economy that exists with community businesses sitting alongside social enterprises, cooperatives, trading charities, and other organisations that trade for social purpose. And as part of our work to shape the conditions for community business to thrive, over the last few years, we've been working particularly in 3 regions, so with the Liverpool City region, West Midlands, and the North East Combined Authorities, to help these regions develop and implement strategies to grow and support their local social economies. So building on this work, and with the Westminster government advancing devolution and asking strategic authorities to produce local growth plans to grow the economy in their regions, we think the opportunity is ripe for strategic authorities to create inclusive growth, both with and through their regional social economies, which is what leads us to being here today with all of you, and today launching our new report, Lessons in Local Growth. This has been authored by Power to Change's Jess Craig in our Policy and Insight team and Natalie White in our Practice and Innovation team. And it really draws on the long-term partnerships that we've had in those combined authority regions, but also draws on new research with 8 combined authorities. And what it does is outline a range of lessons for strategic authorities that are looking to strengthen the social economy in their region and enable its contribution to local growth. And just as a short note on terminology, for the purposes of the report and for the majority of our conversation today, I guess we'll use the language of strategic authorities as set out in the English devolution white paper. So that encompasses both mayoral and non-mayoral combined authorities, and all of whom have a role to play in promoting inclusive local growth. So alongside the report today, just to let you know, we are also publishing 3 detailed case studies of the approaches deployed with our partners in the 3 combined authorities mentioned. And we're going to be sharing links to the report and the case studies so that you can access those on our website, which are now live. In terms of today's session, we just want to take the opportunity to share some of those findings, to discuss some of the findings, to hear from you what you think about the findings or what you want to ask about those findings. And so today we're going to be hearing from one of the report's authors and also from some of our really great partners that are going to bring different perspectives on how strategic authorities are creating inclusive growth, both through and with their partnerships with the social economy. And once we've heard some of those sort of initial reflections on the report from our panel, we want to open up the discussion to yourselves. So please do start getting ready to think about your questions, think about things that you're considering as you're listening. And we're going to ask you to use the Q&A function, which should be at the bottom of your screen, rather than the chat for your questions. That will enable everyone to see them and for you to sort of upvote and us to pick out the ones which seem particularly pertinent to yourselves. So let's get on and start introducing our brilliant panelists. So just going to do a quick whiz round before then handing to each of them over the next sort of 15, 20 minutes or so. But first of all, I'd love to introduce you to Natalie White, who is a Practice and Innovation Manager at Power to Change. So she leads on partnerships with local and regional government and is one of the co-authors of this new report. Secondly, delighted to be joined by Jo Leek, who is the Senior Investment Manager at Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, specialising in social investment, business support and people projects within the Combined Authority. Thank you for joining us, Jo. Next, we have Kate Duffy, who is the founder of Junction Point CIC, an infrastructure organisation that works to strengthen the social economy from the ground up, particularly where access to support is patchy or postcode dependent. And then finally, Afzal Hussain is Chief Officer at Wotton Lodge Community Association, a dynamic social enterprise and community landlord in Birmingham. And Wotton Lodge is the lead organisation for one of the West Midlands Combined Authority social economy clusters, developed as part of the Combined Authority strategy to double the size of the regional social economy. So we are in brilliant hands with our panellists today, and I'm really looking forward to everything that they've got to say and the reflections that they want to bring to this agenda and to some of the ideas in the report itself. And to help us do that, to orientate ourselves as to what is in the report that we're launching today, I'm going to first hand us to Natalie, who's going to kick off with a bit of an overview of some of the research and its findings. So over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Nicola. And welcome again, everyone. It's really great to have so many of you joining us today for this discussion, and great to be joined by such brilliant panellists who have all been really important partners for Power to Change in different ways in our work to strengthen the community business sector in regions. So I think my colleague Louisa should be sharing some slides shortly. Here they are. Great. Thank you. So Louisa, if I could have the first slide, please. So yeah, really pleased to be here today to launch our new report, Lessons in Local Growth. As one of the authors, as Nicola has said, I'm going to provide a whistle-stop overview of the report before we then get into discussing and reflecting on the findings and lessons as a panel, and how they apply to our own sort of unique perspectives in our work to support the social economy. So the report explores how strategic authorities can support and enable the social economy to create inclusive growth that benefits local people and planet. It sets out a series of lessons, and these have been shaped by Power to Change's experience supporting the growth and development of the community business sector as part of the wider social economy, and particularly our strategic partnerships with 3 regions that Nicola has mentioned, where we've been working for a number of years now. So in Liverpool City region, where we've been working the longest, and have helped, working with partners, helped shape and set up Kindred. In the West Midlands, where we've been supporting the implementation of the social economy growth strategy with the Combined Authority. And in the North East, where our partnership with the Combined Authority to date has primarily focused around shaping and launching the flexible social finance offer. And as mentioned, you can read more about all of these quite different and unique approaches of these regions to supporting social economy growth in the case studies that have been published today alongside the report. But in addition, the findings and lessons within this report have been shaped and supplemented by conversations over recent months with a broad range of strategic authority officers who have been preparing their local growth plans. So just to take this opportunity to thank everyone who's taken time to speak to Jess, Nicola and I to help shape this research. We really appreciate your input. And as a result, we hope that this is a report that resonates with strategic authorities of different maturities, shapes and sizes who want to drive that type of growth that shares prosperity across all communities. If I can have the next slide, please, Louisa. So although Power to Change have been doing this work for a while, probably a little bit quietly in the background, we felt like now was the right time to be bringing together this report and bringing together our learning. And particularly because of the opportunities I think that the present national policy context provide to enable more social economy organisations, but also to harness their potential. So we, of course, have a Labour government who's put kickstarting economic growth as one of their key missions. And in October last year, we saw the publication of the Industrial Strategy Green Paper, which sets out a 10-year vision to create the right conditions for increased investment, high quality jobs and ensuring tangible impact in communities right across the UK. The government's approach has crucially and rightly recognised the vital role of regions in achieving this mission. and is proceeding with widening and deepening English devolution to support this. So increasing powers and resources for strategic authorities and supporting new areas to move towards devolution deals. And in fact, one of Number 10's first actions was to convene Metro mayors and instruct them to produce these 10-year local growth plans for their regions. We've started to see versions of these local growth plans being published over recent months. And what we know from seeing these and from the conversations we've been having with officers is that there's a recognition that these growth plans really need to create a type of growth that can raise living standards and address inequalities in regions. So whilst they're important in terms of their contribution to the national growth mission, they must also address those challenges and opportunities that are closer to home. So yes, backing high growth sectors like the ones articulated in the Green Paper, and that's really important to boost productivity, but also a recognition that there needs to be a range of sectors and organisations that need to be part of the mix to create sustainable and thriving local economies. So to reflect this, we're seeing in the plans references to things like the everyday or foundational economy, which includes sectors like health and care, food systems, housing and retail, which is important as collectively they represent the largest share of employment across England and the majority of share of employment in many regions. But at the same time, these sectors do suffer from precarity and low pay. And so there's a real need to look at increasing prosperity for all as part of the growth strategies. And that's where the social economy comes in. So why it matters? Well, the social economy, it cuts across these sectors, the everyday economy sectors, but also high growth sectors, which I think is important to recognise. And it matters because when given the right support and resources, these types of organisations, so we're talking about community businesses, cooperatives, social enterprises, trading charities, they can drive economic inclusion as well as economic productivity. So social economy organisations tend to operate within the most disadvantaged communities. They provide jobs and opportunities to those furthest from the labour market, and the wealth they generate is maintained and circulated locally. So supporting these types of businesses can ensure prosperity is shared amongst communities rather than some being left behind in the pursuit of growth. And I think that's really pertinent when we've seen the negative impact of recent shocks like the COVID-19 pandemic and the cost of living crisis on communities, and particularly the most vulnerable and disadvantaged. So if I can have the next slide, please, Louisa. I'm not going to have time to go into the detail of the social economy's contribution, but the report includes some really compelling statistics on this, both the economic case, which I think is really important to recognise that these businesses are really important important economic actors. And I recommend having a look at Power to Change's recent economic case research for the community business sector if you're interested in more on this, and someone might be able to pop a link in the chat to that. The report also, of course, importantly talks about the social contribution of these businesses, which is what sort of brings the inclusivity of these types of organisations as opposed to more extractive business models. So they can create real impact in their communities, particularly in places that are economically and socially marginalised. And I think by understanding the scale, income and economic and social contributions of the sector, we can better appreciate its potential to create that good local growth. And that's in fact one of the lessons we articulate in the report. So if I can go on to the final slide now, Louisa, which it provides an outline of these 10 lessons in the report. So it's a quick overview. I don't have time to go through them one by one, but just to give you a flavour of what's in there. And we'll hopefully get into the meat of some of these during the discussion. But the lessons in the report comprise of a set of principles, challenges, and good practice examples that we hope will serve as inspiration for strategic authorities as well as their constituent local authorities who are seeking to drive that inclusive type of local growth by working with the social economy. And they're by no means a one-size-fits-all solution. We recognise that to be successful, approaches need to reflect the unique context of a place and its social economy. So these are intended to be able to be deployed by different places in response to need and the sector position to really help create conditions for the social economy to thrive. And so they really vary from lessons that speak more to the approach and culture of strategic authorities, so creating that bold vision, that shared understanding of the social economy, testing and learning culture. And that's, in response to something we've heard very strongly in conversations, that there's recognition of the potential of the social economy in achieving broad outcomes, but it's a sense that it's something that's happening kind of everywhere at once and maybe meaning different things to different people. So there's need for more coordination and leadership in that space. Other lessons look at more how strategic authorities can partner with others in their mission to grow the sector. We're not saying that strategic authorities should be doing this work by themselves. It's absolutely about collaborating with others. And I think strategic authorities are really well placed to draw on their powerful role as conveners in place and their ability to champion and promote the sector, to crowd in support and resources from across the public, private and social sectors. And we've also included lessons around how strategic authorities can use devolved funds to provide the types of business support and finance that these types of organisations need to grow and thrive. And there's some really great examples in the report of regions that are already doing this work and being pioneers in this space. So ultimately, we think that social economy organisations should be seen as core to economic policy in the same way that other sectors and organisations are. And I think articulating and reiterating commitments to the social economy in local growth plans and complementary economic strategies is a great step, so strategic authorities can deliver on devolution and inclusive growth that is seen and felt in people's everyday lives. So I will stop there for now and pass back to you, Nicola.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Natalie, for firstly pulling all of that together with Jess and for walking us through the headlines so swiftly and clearly there. So hopefully everyone's got a bit more of an idea as to what we've got in that report, and we'd love to start to get into some of the reflections and discussions. So I'm going to move straight on to that just to make sure that we've got time to hear a lot from others. And Jo, I might come to you first, if that's all right. Just for you, obviously we've done a lot of this work with combined authorities, including yourself, and a number of the lessons we hope are useful for many partners, but including other sort of strategic authorities. And so, yeah, hand over to you just to share your thoughts, reflections, and yeah, anything that you take from it, from what you've seen so far. Thanks, Jo.
Sure, yeah, and I'm going to do that with a bit of a Liverpool City Region flavour, if that's okay, and try and pull out some of the lessons for other places. So Liverpool City Region's got a really strong social economy, but I guess as with many places, it's really important to recognise that that is often born from a really high level of need and entrenched societal deprivation issues. And so if we want to create places that are for the people that live in them, social economy is absolutely vital. The social economy drives societal change and economic growth, and we're demonstrating locally in Liverpool City Region how we can get more investment to communities and individuals who've been left behind by traditional models of economic growth. So quite simply, you can't really have inclusive local growth without a social economy. And I think it's really important just to recognise how intrinsically linked that is to local growth. So in terms of combined authorities, I think in terms of my view around what they can do to help facilitate the sector. So combined authorities are in essence regional bodies to support economic development of the place. So they create the link between national and local in a strategic way that is more meaningful at a place level. CAs have three main levers really, as regional policymakers, as funders and as conveners. And combined authorities can, and this is my very strong opinion, should advocate and support development of social economy across all three of those roles. And you'll see from the report that can be done in a number of ways, whether that's direct investment into the sector, whether it's through different procurement practices and enabling the social economy growth through that, or more strategic links within policy documents. And I think what's really important though, and I think the report does highlight this, the nuance really is around the way in which a CA needs to respond really needs to be contextually relevant to the place. And so for Liverpool City Region investing in Kindred and it being developed and owned by the sector has been really important for us. Our regional mayor's been quoted as saying this is an example of devolution in action. It's why we were given devolution, because we've enabled local businesses to build a fairer, more inclusive economy. So I just think it's really important but it is really important to recognise where places are in terms of what they're kind of ready to take on, and how much political and local support there is, and how much work's already been done in different spaces. In terms of the report, I just wanted to pull out 3 key points really around the work that we've done locally that have been really important, I think, that really resonate with us from the report. So one is around vision. So the vision for us started really simple: get the money into the hands of the communities who need it and know best how to solve their own issues. And so the starting point for this was through Kindred, and we as a CA have made a £5.5 million investment alongside Power to Change, who've also invested in Kindred. But really that's part of a more longer term strategy that can evolve into on how we can evolve now into that more of an innovation space, and looking at some of those broader societal challenges and how we can foster more community ownership. The second thing is around working in partnership. So this has really been embedded in our work from day one. As a CA, we brought together some key actors. We're kind of doing some work in the region, and we're connected but not necessarily really focused around the things. So we convened people to come together and said, actually, how do we solve this problem? You know, recognising that the CA, there might be low levels of trust to the CA. We were quite new at the time. We're a large public body, and so there's a power dynamic there. So obviously we worked really closely with Power to Change and other leaders who'd been in and around this space and promoting the agenda in the Liverpool City region, doing various bits of work. We put a partnership agreement in place, and we agreed what our shared ambition would be, and provided some development funding for that. And I think one of the cultures that we've managed to create across that partnership is a doing with rather than doing to. And I think that's really helped build that trust in the sector, that the CA is genuinely working in collaboration with the sector and not doing things to it. I think the other thing the partnership agreement did for us was just really help clarify the roles of each party. So we weren't treading on each other's toes. We all had a really clear understanding from day one who was doing what and how we were going to work together in that space. I think the third thing for me is just about understanding the local context. So we use a variety of different data, research, evidence, intelligence that we had at the time to understand the local social economy. There was quite a lot of work that had already been done in the region in that space. But I think we realised quite quickly what we didn't have a clear picture of was what was the demand and what was the failure and what wasn't working. So we knew that there was lots of social finance around. We knew that the sector was having a hard time accessing finance, and we just really needed to get a clearer picture on that. So a lot of the development work was really around working with the sector, understanding what didn't work for them, understanding what their demand was for kind of social investment. And yeah, from a CA perspective, that was really crucial to just make sure we had the confidence that we weren't just putting money irresponsibly out that was just the wrong type of money or couldn't be spent. I think what it's also done is stimulated that kind of greater pipeline of potential investments as well within the region. I think just to conclude, I think just you just asked us to reflect on some advice, I think. So my one bit of advice for those kind of wanting to harness social economy to support inclusive growth is don't try to boil the ocean. So you need to start where a place is at, and CAs are really well placed to help navigate, understand that. But I think we must always be really mindful that we are public bodies, and we need to allow that space for innovation to happen. And that sometimes doesn't sit inside the CA, although we've got a key role in that. And so we've started with finance, we've done things around community wealth building, but it's always been part of a wider strategic ambition. So we're now working on our next phase, which is really about unlocking that next phase for us, how we unlock more investment into the region and how we use that to overcome how we kind of improve community development, and also looking in the public service innovation space and how we use more social investment there. So I'll just pause there, Nicola, because I'm sure there'll be loads to dig into over the course of the webinar.
Brilliant, Jo. Thank you so much. Yeah, so much in there. So brilliant to hear about your experiences from the region, and also your reflections around, just the importance of that sort of local context and the tailoring and going at the speed and picking out the bits that you're ready to move on and things, rather than thinking you've got to do it all at once. So some really great tips and bits of advice there as well for us to pick up on. I'm going to bring in the other panelists just to share their reflections, and then we can kind of get into that meat of discussion really. So Kate, if I come to you next at Junction Point CIC, obviously providing a lot of support and infrastructure support to organisations that are looking and are part of the social economy and looking to make it thrive. So we'd love to just sort of, hear about some of the work that you're seeing or the reflections that you've got looking at the report itself. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I'm going to start with a stat that's from your report, and it really sort of struck something with me, that 48% of community businesses operate in 30% of the most disadvantaged areas of England, compared to 14% of mainstream businesses. That's not a coincidence. What we've found recently as well is that our participants, generally sort of 50 to 60% of our participants, are self-identifying as having a physical, learning or mental health disability. So this isn't a group of people that we're actively trying to pursue, but rather people seeing that this is a route for them to take action and make change in their local communities. So when we're talking about the importance of inclusive economy, this is super, super important. I think for the North East, I think we've been really fortunate over the last 18 months. I think we've seen some brilliant programs, some excellent funding in place. So we've got the Social Enterprise Boost programme going. We've got UK Shared Prosperity funding, which has included social ventures. We've also got the Social Finance Fund, which is great. But I think one of the challenges that we're seeing is that as a combined authority, there are still postcode lotteries going on in terms of eligibility, which isn't anything different to the normal sort of commercial business support infrastructure. The same with the length of programs, the time available to work with people, that's really quite challenging. And eligibility barriers, you know, if you've only got 2 directors or if you haven't got enough trading income, then you can't access the business support available to you. That's a challenge when we're talking about an inclusive economy. So that's something I think that we need to look at in more detail. There's no surprise that I think the fifth point is probably the most important one to me, in terms of having that very strong business infrastructure support for founders at the very early stages all the way through their journey. I think what is potentially different and unique to this sector is the fact that, unlike commercial businesses where we can monitor success in terms of jobs, in terms of income generation, for the social economy, we are quite nuanced in that we're trying to create an impact, to make a difference. And when we think that 1 out of 3 kicks aren't going to make it to their 5th birthday, we probably need to be thinking about this in a slightly different way, from startup support and scaling support, rather perhaps looking at those year 2 to 3 danger years, which at the moment, in terms of gaps of provision, I think that's something that we've seen probably across the UK, that in terms of that support, funded support available, it's very bookended and there's not much to support people create sustainable organisations. I think we're a complex sector, and I think it's wonderful that we're now seeing so many infrastructure organisations, both from a VCSE perspective, but also from a commercial business perspective, looking to provide support in this space. I think the infrastructure is there. I think the will is there. I think that perhaps what we might be lacking in some areas is perhaps the skills and understanding of the complexities of what it means to work with the social sector, from the complexities of legal structures all the way through to governance, to impact measurement. They're not bolt-on subjects that just fit into commercial businesses. It's a highly complex beast that needs to be understood really well. So from our perspective, we feel that there is probably a quality assurance gap there, ensuring that all of our early stage founders, or founders looking at sustainability or growth, are able to access the support that they need and be able to trust the advice that they're given. So it's something that we're developing at the moment. We've got a level 5 qualification that will be launching in January to try and help those new advisors to understand the social sector a little bit more, and have that quality assurance badge that means that this is a voice that's worth listening to. I think that quite often with the social sector, you can look at it from 2 different lenses. On the one hand, we've got the best of both worlds. We've got double the support. You can access it through your VCSE support organisation and you can access it through the business infrastructure support organisations. The flip side of that is that we fall between the cracks of the two, and navigating that ever-changing landscape can be really problematic, especially when we're talking about the additional challenges that quite often we find that certainly from our perspective that our founders are facing, especially when you have people that are coming to business with lived experience of something completely different to business, but the passion and the skill to make a difference because of that. In terms of advice, in terms of what I'd like to see going forwards, I think there's a lot of information out there already. There's a lot of really good practice examples. The universities have been doing brilliant studies on the key ingredients that are needed for founders to succeed. We've got brilliant infrastructure organisations within the sector who want to see this succeed. I think the challenge now is about bringing all those ingredients together to reduce the gaps between support provision and ensure that that quality runs throughout, whether you're at the early stages and you go to one organisation or you're ready for growth. Yeah, I think it's a case of more research like this, more reports like this, and more sharing of best practice, so that it doesn't matter where you are at on your journey to making a difference, you can access the support that you need as you go along. So that's probably everything for me at this point.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Kate. And again, some really, really interesting reflections in there. And like you say, you're very experienced in that sort of business support and infrastructure. So picking out some of those dimensions are super helpful, both from the sort of the quality assurance kind of side of things, but also that sort of, you know, once you're established, but before you're yet sort of really scaling out, how you sort of build on the establishment into in the growth kind of phase, if you like. So some interesting things to think about there. So thank you for bringing that in. Great. I'm going to hand us over to our final panelist, just Afsal, for your reflections. And obviously, you're working directly with communities and working from your base in Birmingham as well. So really interested in your experiences and any reflections you want to bring to this area. Over to you.
Thanks, Nicola, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me just begin by congratulating Power to Change on a really impressive report. It's hugely insightful and a really great balance of policy and practice, and certainly reading it, it sparked ideas, and that's always a good sign. And I know there's lots of people on the call. I'd encourage you, and actually I don't need to encourage you, I think it'll draw you in beyond the exec summary. So I think it does that. Well, Kate took one of my insights, which is about half of social enterprises working in some of the most deprived communities. I think that also there's a announcement from DCMS on the Dormant Assets Fund, and actually they also make very similar points about the compelling kind of nature of the social economy. And one of the stats that they had is for every £100,000 of turnover in the social economy, we create 3 jobs, compared to 2/3 of 1 job for the same turnover in the private sector. And if we think about some of the challenges of economic inactivity and the role of social enterprise and the potential of that, I think it's huge. Also, I thought the lessons, the 10 lessons, are very clear and compelling, and some of those resonated more with me than others. The point about culture, I think, is really important. Often we set big visions, but the culture needs to follow up, and that's often what drives the kind of juice through these things. I think it's really important. Raising the profile, the understanding of the social economy, but also the status of it, I think is really important, and that's drawn out. Business support, yes, we need to mainstream it, recognize the support for the social economy on the same basis that we often do in combined authorities and local authorities when it comes to business support. How do we mainstream that, but do it with us rather than to us? I'm really pleased that you've picked up on the perennial kind of issue of access to finance. It continues to be an issue in our sector. Unnecessarily complex, and some simplification of that is important, and recognizing the untapped power of procurement and buying power. I think that's a huge untapped resource and could be well, transformative really in this. Just take a moment to reflect on maybe some broader points. Economic growth, because it sits within the context of that. economic growth without really the nuance and thought of where and how it lands is just economic expansion. And the truth of it, some of our neighborhoods, some of our communities have been in perpetual recession for decades. So GDP and GVA and other metrics actually don't mean much in those neighborhoods, in those communities. The other thing just to say is that, trust in politics is where it is. And we know that when trust goes down, it creates spaces for other forces and some malign forces. And I just think that there is something more fundamental and shifts underway, which aren't, always positive. So what does that mean for us? Yes, I think recognize that high tech and, high growth sectors are really important, and no one's saying that they're on, but it's not enough. It is, as your report kind of, focuses on, so is the foundational economy and the social economy. And really for politicians and for policymakers, I think we ignore that at our peril. And if people don't see it and experience it, I think others will claim it, and we can make economic growth matter. We can make it real and felt. And we know the social economy works on kind of multiple layers. It is relational, it is human scale, it is what our communities see and experience. It is about our children, our young people. It creates jobs, apprenticeship opportunities, work experience, and volunteering. These are all hugely kind of, I think, important, but kind of understated and underappreciated. And it's about our communities, it's about our neighborhoods, it's about our high streets, and ultimately about the services that we provide. So I just think there's a huge amount there. I think the point about the social economy, it's well made in the report about increasing the visibility, the profile. How do we lock in this awareness that this report has set out rightly? How do we make it visible to policymakers, particularly as we're, working on devolution and integrated settlements? How do we just make this business as usual? I think that's really important. And it would be remiss of me not to say something about kind of my part of the world. I think in the West Midlands, I think the Combined Authority has a great ambition of doubling the social economy. I think that's really welcome. I think the work that it's initiated through the cluster work across the region, I think that's a really important and welcome first step. And I don't know whether Charles is on the call, but actually in Charles within the Combined Authority, I think we have someone who understands the sector, and that is really important. We need more people like him in those positions. But the challenge for us is, how do we now bake this into the integrated settlement that that's being kind of drawn up? And just to kind of finally say that those of us that work in the social economy, we're up for this. We're up for the challenge. We're happy to. We want to co-produce. We want to co-invest. We want to share the risk. We want to share the rewards with you. And this is the moment, isn't it? Let's seize it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Afzal. Brilliant reflections and a great call to action there as well for us all. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this discussion. I can see a couple of questions coming through already, but yes, as we're prompting in the chat, do please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens to add anything else that you would like to ask of any of our panelists. And we'll start to sort of work our way through some of the kind of themes coming through what we've just heard and some of the kind of questions that people are picking up on. I mean, I guess there's something which is you've all brought out and which people are really kind of passionate about here, really, which is around the role that the social economy can play on the sort of inclusion agenda, if you like. So, and not just because that's a nice thing to do, but because it genuinely makes a difference. It sort of retains wealth. It gives jobs to people that are often the people that are unemployed or the furthest from the labour market. It can stimulate some of that sort of wider economic growth engine activity, if you like. And I'm guessing it's part of like some of the lessons almost, but you've all sort of mentioned that in your different ways of picking out statistics or stories. What will it take? What have you seen work, I suppose, that can actually help to do that sort of mainstreaming further, so that the role that the social economy is playing in relation to inclusive growth is just part of what we do, rather than the thing that's happening on the sideline. Any sort of reflections on that, just to kind of kick us off, and then I'll get straight into some of the questions from participants as well. Kate, I might jump back to you first of all, because you picked out that statistic just in terms of that sort of, you know, the number of community enterprises that are already sort of working and operating in areas of less advantage, if you like. So yeah, let me come to you and just any further reflections that you've got around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think best practice tells us that everything we do, we should be being more inclusive, we should be being more accessible. I think from a business support perspective, I think certainly quite a lot of our participants, as soon as you start talking about business, I think they get a little bit frightened. That's not for me. I haven't got a business degree. Oh, scary, accountants, numbers. I think that the inclusive economy and the social economy provide opportunity for people that have got a true passion and a real ability to make a difference at a local level. So in terms of support provision, we need to be seeing a range of opportunities. So not just a one size fits all. So rather having organisations that are working in more challenging communities where there are lots and lots of things going on, or working with particular groups within the community that mean that it provides additional access opportunity. But equally, those organisations talking to each other. So I think one of the challenges that can happen because of the way that funding is quite often accessed is that people have to work in silos, and where someone has gone in the front door, if you like, to access support in one organisation, it may not then be obvious as to where those next steps might be. And I think as a sector, we have a bit of a moral obligation to make that easier for people to be able to access those next steps and keep building confidence and getting to the point where, yes, I am going to go to that accountancy training course because I can do it, rather than it being, that can't possibly be for me. So I think from what sort of rings true from my perspective is giving people access and support at whatever stage they're at and whatever baggage they're bringing to the table, rather than perhaps just the easy wins that might just, flip over and launch a company and then they're done. I think we're missing something if we don't do the hard work in those communities. We don't go and find the people living in those communities that have the answers and providing the right support at the right time for those people to take that action.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, a lot in there about sort of like that confidence and also going to where people are rather than expecting from their position to always sort of come to us. Thank you. Jo, I wonder if you've got any sort of reflections to bring to that.
Yeah, I think so. So I think for me, what's been really important for us as regions is to have those demonstrators to say, actually, look, this is what we can do. And so, if we had a very practical problem with how we make sure devolved funding can benefit the communities that need it most, which was kind of the original starting point from our perspective for Kindred. I guess now we've got examples of organisations who've been through that process. So some of the original thesis within the original business case for that funding, we can now test a bit more and we can demonstrate. And in some cases it's worked, some cases we've had to be agile and move the response. But I think there's a couple of really interesting examples that have come out of that for me now. One is we've got an organisation who was very grant dependent, had kind of looked at different trading models, would never have even considered any form of loan or repayment because they were just too nervous about it. Will never grow to a massive organisation, but has now grown to between 3 and 5 employees and have taken a loan from Kindred because they trust them. And because that trusts them, it's not just some financial institution that's going to exploit them, or it's not just some public sector body that'll be here today, gone tomorrow. There's that trust element. And I think like we've got other examples in the region where we have had scaling businesses. So we've started with really small, few £100, kind of just give it a go, try something out. Again, don't even talk to me about social investment because I'm not interested in that. That's like, well, that's not for me. Who is now one of our biggest consumers of social investment in the region over the course of like 3 to 5 years, because they've got that ambition to grow, and obviously not all organisations will. So I think for me, having those examples now we can talk about locally, about the impact they're having in place, about those organisations, about how things have been transformational for those organisations, I think is really key, I think, for that. I think the other thing just to recognise in this is the attitudes, I guess, are still very mixed. So I think the question that you posed, Nick, was how do we embed it more? So I think there are people that still think that, you know, this is just about small scale community business, your laundrettes on the high street, you know, but it's not, you know, it's so much more than that. And we've got social economy organisations across all of our key sectors, and it's almost seen as separate. And so I'm not saying that they're only in our key sectors, but they definitely are in those spaces as well. So I think, again, just trying to shift the narrative around that for us, that these aren't just small localized organisations. They can be, but they're not always. And I think is really important for us in just trying to shift some of those perceptions locally.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jo. Yeah, no, super important that they're absolutely core, and cutting across your different sort of sectors is a really interesting way of sort of making that case, if you like. Afsar, is there anything you want to come in on in terms of that sort of inclusion question?
Just to say, I mean, I think if we can make it's just following on from the points. I know we think the social economy is special, and it is, but it doesn't need to be a special case. How do you bring it in? Just make it part of what you do and how you do it. I think in our region, for example, the fundings come from some underspend, so it's special money always. Well, how do we bring it in as part of the core business and so forth? And I think it's a boring stuff. It's the small stuff. It's evolution, iterative, etc. And just I think that's really important. I do think, and I keep banging on about this, the buying power procurement. There is money in the system. That is, you know, I mean, how many social value managers do you kind of see on big firms, etc.? There are loads of there is money in the system which could be harnessed better and directed better. I think, and I think there's also a responsibility on us in the sector. Actually, I think we you know, if we need to develop a more compelling narrative. Often we get caught out, you know, what's the social economy? Is it co-ops? Is it CICs? Is it charities and so forth? And it creates a bit of a fog, really, and we miss the purpose. It's the impact, and I think we focus on that, and that's something I think we can do better. And we're giving some thought to, you know, how do we do that? How do we, you know, make our impact clearer? How do we make it real time? How do we, you know, keep it updated to continue to kind of inform that policy and practice?
Yeah, brilliant. Good challenge back to all of ourselves there to sort of do the mainstreaming as much as asking others to be thinking about it as a core part of their economic agendas. I'm going to pick up some of the questions kind of coming through. Thank you for sharing, and do pop anything else that comes to mind. I mean, just obviously one of the contexts, I guess, to the report that we've produced is knowing that the local growth plans were being asked of strategic authorities and people working on them, starting to publish them, thinking about them, and looking at where there was an opportunity to sort of like tie these agendas together to say, let's not go off in that direction without considering the social economy. And there's a question here which is around, to what extent are combined authorities adopting inclusive economy as a key aim in their local growth plans? Clearly there are some, but how widespread is it, and what is preventing wider uptake? Natalie, I might come to you for a few sort of reflections from sort of looking across and consulting across various combined authorities, and then also Jo, maybe just some reflections in terms of what's happening in your region as well. But Natalie first.
Thanks, Nicola. And yeah, and certainly the combined authorities that we've spoken to, there certainly is will to be referencing inclusivity and social economy within local growth plans. Sorry, excuse me. I think one of the things that we know people are struggling with is that they are, at the moment, the structure of government is that they are around these high growth sectors. So the struggle is at the moment, I think, trying to fit this stuff, how to reflect that into that shape and to get that right. So I think that's where the tension is we're feeling the tension at the moment, but we know that there are a lot of people working to try and find ways to weave it through. And certainly I think different places probably are taking slightly different approaches, reflecting like the different sort of stages of devolution across the country. Some are sort of repurposing or reusing existing strategies, and some are taking a bit more of an approach, starting from scratch. But there certainly will. And I think there is certainly will at the political and senior level. Sorry, I've got a bit of a croak at the moment, as you might have noticed, to make sure that these growth plans are really providing like opportunity for all in the regions. I think it's probably just that tension of the structure that people are grappling with at the moment. But yeah, Jo might have some more reflections in terms from her sort of direct experience.
Yeah, I just agree with that. I think because it's this sectoral focus, it just makes it really challenging. Because although we do have organisations in those sectors, they're definitely not the bulk of the organisations locally that are social organisations. I think for us, just trying to weave it in. So because we now are taking forward the next iteration of Kindred, which is the social investment pathfinder, and that is really around that inclusive growth angle. We've kind of managed to weave it in, but it's been a challenge. It's been a challenge, if I'm really honest. And I think my sense, if I can be really honest, when we've been having that dialogue with government and other places, it's been really difficult, I think, for us to land that message that if we just focus on sectors, you will get a traditional model of economic growth, and that will drive certain behaviours, and it will drive greater levels of poverty. So if you look at the stats around child poverty, they are increasing in areas that are seeing high growth. You have to ask yourself, is that a coincidence or not? I suspect not. So yeah, we are trying to find ways to weave it in. I mean, I guess the other thing around the local growth plans is that they do sit often within structures of different policy, with different policies. So we've got our plan for prosperity as a region, which very clearly sets out the important role of the social economy regionally. So we have got that, and obviously we've got our local skills plans and other plans that all kind of reference the importance of the sector and that inclusive growth. I guess for me, it's just, if we don't embed the idea of social economy and that they can grow and that they can create more inclusive growth and link it directly to the growth agenda, it just concerns me that we will just revert back to traditional models of economic growth. So yeah, so like I say, I think I'm, as with Natalie, everyone I've been speaking to locally is having the same challenge, but it's all recognising it as a challenge and trying to find ways around it and making sure that it's not lost, which is, makes me hopeful.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Natalie. Thanks, Jo. Yeah, the hopeful thing is that actually we're not coming up against lots of barriers or people not recognising its need to weave the need for it to be woven in, but actually the structure, the format, depending on where you already are in your development of local economic strategy and regional economic strategy, is making it a bit tricky. And there was a bit of chat earlier on in the chat about, actually just let's get on with it, just evolve. And I guess, it's really kind of, you want people to be able to maneuver things in a way that suits where they're at, and everyone perhaps is being slightly required to work in a certain way, which is creating some difficulties. There's a link question here, which is picking up on some of the other things which you've already chatted about, but it's like, how are we seeing others sort of identify and articulate the contribution of socially trading organisations or social economy organisations sort of in their local growth plans or in the work in general? So like, how do we not only know and try to mainstream the contribution, but like actually I think this question is sort of like, how do we demonstrate the value? And what is the best way of doing that? What are you seeing that's sort of working already, be it through methods or channels and that sort of stuff, really? I don't know if there's anybody that wants to particularly come in on that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really tricky. I think it's something that kind of weaves across all of the suggestions with this report. It's a challenge from a procurement perspective and the opportunities of contracting. And as you say, there's money in the system and being able to access it, getting into the places that can have the most impact. I think generally sort of Tom's framework is still the kind of standard approach for monitoring social impact. But I think it's fair to say that certainly from a sector perspective, we see it as very problematic. It's not nuanced enough for this sector to be able to really shout about the impact that it has, especially as we've been talking about the huge spectrum of sizes and shapes and industries that this sector covers. So I don't think that there is a one-size-fits-all approach to being able to capture and articulate the impact of this sector, which I don't think probably helps. But I don't think that there is at the moment that actually fixes that problem.
No, that's super helpful, Kate, because it's sort of indicating some of the things that need to, there's ongoing work to be done here, right? So indicating where that energy needs to go next, or what the sorts of things that need to be picked up. And Sue Parkinson, who asked the question, is also sharing that she's got some ideas and would be happy to share with us and things like that as well. So actually, I think these are the opportunities for us to coalesce, isn't it? Convene and keep these conversations and these sort of areas of work developing, really, so that we can do that, because it feels like it's sort of part of continuing to sort of make the case, really. Afzal, was you wanting to come in on that as well?
Just very briefly, I mean, I think
Yeah.
one of the strengths of the social economy in our sector, it's kind of, diverse in nuance. It's also our weakness. What we aren't is a small number of large organizations who can come together and lobby and so forth. So there is something about how do we do that, and how do we make our work and our impact more visible, and I think that's some of the things that we're picking. So one of the ways, for example, just in the city rather than the region as a whole, in Birmingham, for example, we've come together as community anchor organizations, and most of us, not all necessarily, kind of would describe ourselves as part of the social economy, but kind of anchor institutions at a community level working together. And just to be able to pull together our impact, for example, on those key kind of measures, whether that's about kind of job skills, health, and so forth, and outcomes, and to make that easy to communicate. And there is some work for us to do, that better, because we know about the impact. I mean, the report here highlights that, but it feels like we revisit that, don't we, kind of every 6 months or a year or something. It's how do we, do that? And that may be work that we do with our local universities, or, other ways of kind of doing. So I think there is something in that to keep it relevant and visible. And maybe we focus in on a small number of key measures and metrics. So economic inactivity, for example, I mean, that is an issue. I suspect it's an issue in all three of the kind of combined authorities, certainly in the West Midlands. The rates of kind of economic inactivity are really high. So what can we do? And we know some of the first steps, first rungs to move into and closer to the labour market, organizations like ours have a really important role to play in that. So, it's making ourselves absolutely relevant. We know we are, but sometimes talking to the key priorities and the policies and connecting those in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it resonates with some of the other kind of comments actually about this being a positive contribution that can be made. It's not a got to do something different, got to do something extra. Your point earlier on, Afzal, about unlocking existing capital that's already flowing around the system, but just directing it in slightly different ways. It's a positive, helpful contribution to what everyone is trying to achieve in terms of sort of outcomes as well. We are really sort of up against time here, which is a shame because we've got some other great questions and the conversation's just getting started, really. But some brilliant things about sort of stimulating that sort of work locally. How do you really get sort of areas that perhaps aren't currently sort of really sort of taking that sort of community-led approach? So lots of ideas on that, Dawn. If you want to follow up with any of us at Power to Change, please do so, and we can kind of connect you into other examples and things like that you know about. And also just to reflect an interesting sort of reflection here from Jonathan about the sort of horizontal priorities that governments, combined authorities, strategic authorities consider, as well as the sort of sectors, if you like. And yeah, also really happy to consider further conversations around that as well. We are coming to a close, so just want to primarily say thank you so much to everybody who has joined the session this afternoon. We scratched the surface, but the links to the report and to the case study, which I would encourage you to have a look at both of those, are in the chat and on our website. I want to massively thank all of our panelists today for sharing your time, for being involved and giving your reflections, and so helpful, just both in terms of where we're at now, but also some of those pointers about where things need to go next. And that's certainly useful for all of us in thinking about how we can continue to work together to take things forward. So massive thank you to Kate, Jo, Afzal, and to Natalie. Big thanks to Natalie and to Jess for leading all of the research and the work in practice from Power to Change side. As I say, we're keen to continue the conversation. This is work that we continue to do. So anyone who wants to follow up with us and follow up with Natalie, please feel free to reach out and get in touch directly. Really happy to keep talking and exploring. And also just generally from Power to Change, we're celebrating 10 years this year. So 10 years of backing community business. So lots of other things coming up, activities, events. Keep an eye out. If you're not already signed up, feel free to sign up to our newsletter, which is available via the website, and you can keep up to date with everything there. But it's past, so I better leave it there and say thanks again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and hopefully see you all again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.